Yuna stood alone in the great hall of the Galactic Accord. The chamber was enormous, built for species that stood 12 feet tall, and she had always felt small in it. But today, she did not feel small. Today, she felt something cold settle into her chest, like a stone dropped into still water. The decree was in her hands, a thin sheet of translated text, printed on paper because the Accord believed humans still preferred primitive things. She read it once, then again. The words did not change. By unanimous resolution of the Overseer Conclave, the species known as Homo sapiens, originating from the Sol system, is hereby reclassified under Tier 5 of the Galactic Charter. All rights of sovereignty, self-governance, territorial claim, and military authorization are revoked effective immediately. Human populations across all registered colonies are to be redistributed as labor assets under the supervision of conclave-appointed wardens. Compliance is expected within 90 standard days. Tier 5. Yuna knew what that meant. Every human diplomat who had ever studied the Accord's history knew. Tier 5 was not a classification. It was a sentence. It meant that in the eyes of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, humans were not people. They were tools. Living, breathing, bleeding tools. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her pocket. Her hands were steady. Her face showed nothing. Around her, the chamber was empty. Every alien diplomat had left after the vote, some quickly, some slowly, a few glancing back at her with something that might have been guilt. None of them had spoken to her. None of them had warned her. She walked to the communications room and transmitted the full text of the decree to Earth, without adding a single word of her own. She did not need to explain. The words would do that on their own. 6 hours later, the decree reached every screen on Earth and across its 12 colony worlds. It appeared on phones, on televisions, on the massive public displays in city squares. It was translated into every human language within minutes. People read it in Tokyo and in Lagos, in Sao Paulo and in Stockholm, in Busan and in Cairo. And then something strange happened. Something that would later terrify the galaxy far more than any weapon ever could. Nothing. There were no riots, no screaming crowds, no burning buildings. The world went quiet. A heavy, thinking silence spread across the planet like a blanket of snow. Families sat together in their living rooms and read the words. Factory workers stopped their machines, looked at each other, and nodded slowly. Soldiers in barracks read it on their tablets, and then began checking their equipment without being ordered to. Teachers in classrooms turned off the news and told their students to go home and be with their families. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a species making a decision together, without needing to speak it aloud. Do-hyun received the call at his home outside Incheon. He had been retired for 7 years. He had been the youngest admiral in the history of the United Earth Navy, and he had walked away from it because peacetime bored him, and he did not trust what boredom might turn him into. He had a small garden now. He grew tomatoes and peppers, and sometimes sat on his porch and watched ships fly overhead toward the orbital stations. The call came from the Secretary General herself. She said very little. She did not need to. He had already read the decree. He put on his old uniform. It still fit. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time, and something behind his eyes shifted, like a machine turning on after years of sleep. Then he left the house without locking the door. He would not be coming back for a while. The United Earth War Council had been assembled in less than 8 hours. Every world leader attended, most through screens, a few in person. The room was deep underground, in a facility that officially did not exist. When Do-hyun walked through the doors, every conversation stopped. He looked around the room. He saw fear in some faces, anger in others, confusion in a few. But mostly he saw what he had seen on every street, in every home, on every screen, that same cold, focused silence. He sat down at the head of the table. No one questioned it. No one asked for a vote. There are moments when people simply know who should lead, and this was one of them. They don't know what we are, Do-hyun said. That was all. 5 words. But in that room, those 5 words meant everything. They meant that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They meant that humanity had been underestimated in a way that would not be forgiven. They meant that the 90-day window the Accord had given was not a countdown to submission. It was a countdown to something the galaxy had never faced before. The meeting lasted 14 hours. Plans were made, orders were given, old projects were pulled from classified archives and given new life. A war economy began to take shape before the sun rose the next morning. And deep beneath the frozen ground of Siberia, in a facility buried so far underground that no satellite or scanner had ever detected it, a man named Taewon sat at a console, surrounded by screens and machines that hummed with quiet power. He had worked here for 11 years. He had built things in this place that he sometimes wished he had not built. Things that kept him awake at night. Things that he had hoped would never be needed. His screen lit up with a single encrypted message from the War Council. It contained 2 words. Sunbreak is live. Taewon read it. He closed his eyes. He pressed his palms flat against the desk and let out a long, slow breath. Then he whispered to the empty room, "Finally." Above him, the world was still quiet. But it was not the quiet of defeat. It was the quiet of something waking up. Something old and patient and terrible. The galaxy had looked at humanity and seen something small and manageable. Something that could be owned. They had no idea what was coming. The galaxy expected surrender. That was the only thing it could imagine, because in 12,000 years of Galactic Accord history, no species had ever refused a conclave decree. The system was too large, too old, too powerful. Resistance was not just futile, it was unthinkable. So when Earth went silent and refused to answer any communication for weeks, the Accord assumed it was shock, grief, the slow acceptance of animals finally understanding their place in the order of things. Warden Dreth was given command of 600 warships and told to oversee the transition. He was a career military officer from one of the elder species, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and a face that never showed emotion. He had managed forced relocations before, on smaller worlds, with weaker species. He considered this assignment beneath him. Humans were soft creatures with short lives and fragile bones. He expected to be home within a month. While Dreth assembled his fleet, the Conclave began drafting allocation plans. They discussed human populations the way a company discusses inventory. This colony has strong laborers. Send them to the mining worlds. This population has skilled engineers. Redirect them to shipyard construction. Preserve certain genetic lines for breeding programs. Sterilize the rest on a schedule to manage population growth. They said these things in official meetings, recorded in official documents, without shame or hesitation. To them, it was administration, logistics, nothing personal. On Earth, Hana sat in a dark room filled with screens and smiled. She was the commander of Earth's intelligence network, and she had been building it quietly for over 20 years. Long before the decree, long before anyone in the public knew there was reason to worry, Hana had been placing operatives across the galaxy. They worked as translators, trade assistants, cultural consultants, cleaning staff, invisible roles that gave them access to everything. They learned languages, memorized layouts, copied communication codes, and mapped military installations. Now, with a single activation signal, her entire network came alive. Within 48 hours, Hana had real-time access to the fleet positions, communication channels, supply routes, and strategic vulnerabilities of every species in the Conclave. She brought her findings to Do-hyun in a briefing that lasted 3 hours. The picture she painted was almost absurd. The elder species had not fought a real war in over 4,000 years. Their warships were large and impressive and built mostly for display. Their soldiers were trained for crowd control, not combat. Their commanders had earned their ranks through politics, not battle. Their entire military doctrine was designed to intimidate weaker species into submission, not to fight an enemy that actually hit back. They are a museum pretending to be an army, Hana said. Do-hyun nodded slowly. And we are going to teach them the difference. Deep underground, Taewon stood before the War Council and revealed Project Sunbreak. It was not a weapon. It was a philosophy. It was the answer to a question that a small group of military planners had asked themselves 15 years ago. What if the galaxy turns on us? What if one day every alien civilization decides that humanity is a threat, or a resource, or an inconvenience? What do we do then? Sunbreak was the answer. And it was terrifying. Taewon showed them the gravitational pulse warheads first. Each one could generate a focused wave of gravitational force, strong enough to crush a warship like a tin can, or destabilize the orbit of a small moon. He showed them footage of a test. A dead moon in the outer solar system cracking apart like an egg, splitting into pieces that drifted slowly into the void. The War Council watched in complete silence. Then he showed them the drone swarms, self-replicating machines with adaptive intelligence that could manufacture copies of themselves from raw materials found in asteroid fields. Release 100, and within a week you had 10,000. Within a month, 1,000,000. Each one armed, each one capable of independent tactical decisions. Then the stealth fleet. 200 warships hidden among the asteroids and debris of the outer solar system for over a decade, completely undetectable, fully armed, waiting. And then Taewon paused. He looked down at his hands and spoke more quietly. There is one more component. It is called Blackwave. I will not explain what it does in detail. What I will tell you is this. If we use it, the galactic civilization as it exists today will end. Not just the Conclave, not just the Accord, everything. Every connection, every route, every network that holds the galaxy together will be gone. It is not a weapon of war. It is a weapon of last resort. If we use it, we win. But there will be nothing left to win. The room was very still after that. The days passed. Jiho trained. He was 24 years old, born in Busan, raised by a single mother who worked at the docks. He had joined the Earth Defense Corps because it paid well, and he wanted to send money home. He had never expected to fight. He had never expected any of this. Now he sat in the cockpit of a fighter craft and learned how to kill. His instructors taught him vacuum combat, zero-gravity maneuvering, ship-to-ship boarding, and close-quarters fighting in the corridors of alien vessels. He threw up twice on the first day. By the second week, he did not throw up anymore. By the fourth week, he did not flinch anymore either. One night, he sat on his bunk and wrote a letter to his mother. He told her he was fine. He told her not to worry. He told her he loved her and that he would come home. He looked at the letter for a long time, then folded it and put it in his locker. He did not send it. He was not sure he believed what he had written. The 90-day compliance window closed on a Tuesday. Earth had not responded to a single communication from the Accord in 3 months. No messages, no diplomats, no signals of any kind. The galaxy waited. And then, on every frequency, in every known language, broadcast from every transmitter Earth possessed, a single message went out. 6 words. Come and take us. We are waiting. Warden Dreth heard it aboard his flagship. He tilted his head slightly, the closest his species came to showing surprise. Then he ordered his fleet forward. He did not understand what he was flying into. None of them did. But they would. Very soon. Warden Dreth's fleet entered the Sol system expecting ceremony. He had done this before on other worlds, arriving with overwhelming force, watching the smaller species kneel, processing the paperwork, and moving on. He had prepared holding facilities in the cargo bays of his transport ships. He had brought translators and restraint equipment and sedation chemicals calibrated for human biology. Everything was organized. Everything was professional. He did not consider himself cruel. He considered himself efficient. His fleet crossed the outer boundary of the system and found nothing. No defense stations, no patrol ships, no orbital platforms, no mines, nothing. Just the cold silence of open space and the distant light of a yellow star. Dreth checked his sensors 3 times. His tactical officers confirmed there was no detectable military presence anywhere in the system. He allowed himself a small feeling of satisfaction. The humans had realized the futility of resistance. This would be even easier than expected. He ordered his fleet into formation and pushed inward toward Earth at standard approach speed. 11 minutes later, his world ended. It began with a flicker on the edge of every sensor screen across every ship in the fleet. A shimmer, like heat rising off hot ground. Then the shimmer became shapes. Then the shapes became ships. 200 of them, appearing out of nothing, dropping their stealth fields simultaneously in a coordinated reveal that had been rehearsed 1,000 times in the darkness of the asteroid belt. They were already in firing position. They had been waiting for weeks. Dreth had exactly 4 seconds to understand what was happening before the first gravitational pulse hit. The pulse struck the center of his formation like an invisible fist. 80 warships collapsed inward on themselves, their hulls crumpling like paper, their crews crushed before they could even reach their battle stations. The ships folded and twisted and broke apart in silence, because space carries no sound, and there was something terrible about watching 80 ships die without making a noise. The remaining fleet scattered in panic. Dreth screamed orders into his communicator, but his officers were not trained for this. They were trained for parades and inspections and the gentle intimidation of species that could not fight back. They had never faced an enemy that struck first, struck hard, and kept striking without pause. Jiho flew into the chaos with his squadron. His hands were steady on the controls, and his breathing was slow and measured, just as he had practiced 1,000 times. His squadron's target was Dreth's flagship, the largest ship in the fleet, bristling with weapons that had never been fired in actual combat. Hana's intelligence had mapped every weakness of that ship. She had the blueprints, the maintenance schedules, the shift rotations of the crew. She knew where the hull was thinnest, where the sensor coverage had blind spots, where the cannon arrays could not track fast-moving targets. She had given all of this to the pilots weeks ago, and they had memorized it the way students memorize poems. Jiho's wing dove directly into the cannon array along the flagship's port side, flying through a corridor of blind spots that the alien engineers had never bothered to fix, because no enemy had ever gotten close enough to exploit them. The cannons fired wildly. Jiho flew between the barrels of weapons that could have destroyed a city, close enough to see the rivets in the hull plating, and placed his charges with the precision of a surgeon. The hull breached. Atmosphere vented into space in a white cloud of frozen gas. Boarding teams launched from assault shuttles and poured into the opening. Men and women in sealed combat armor, armed with weapons designed for the tight corridors and low ceilings of alien ships. They moved fast. They moved together. They had trained for this specific ship in full-scale mock-ups built from Hana's stolen blueprints. Aboard Do-hyun's command vessel, Nari sat at her station with headphones on, listening to alien communications. She was a xenolinguist. She spoke 11 alien languages fluently, and could read the emotional tones and cultural subtext that translating software always missed. Her job was to tell Do-hyun not just what the enemy was saying, but what they were feeling. What they were feeling was terror. She translated in real time, her voice steady and professional, even as the words she spoke were anything but. One transmission was a tactical officer begging for reinforcements that would never come. Another was a navigation crew abandoning their stations and fleeing deeper into their ship, only to run into a human boarding team coming from the other direction. Another was a senior commander broadcasting on an open channel, his voice breaking, saying that the humans had breached 3 decks and were still advancing and showed no signs of stopping. And then, Nari translated one transmission that made the entire bridge go still. It was from a dying officer aboard one of the crushed ships, someone who had survived the initial pulse and was trapped in a collapsing compartment with a still-functioning communicator. His voice was faint and filled with something beyond fear, a kind of bewildered disbelief, as if he was seeing something his mind could not accept. "They are not retreating," he said. "They are not negotiating. They are smiling." Nari repeated the words to Do-Yun. He said nothing. His face did not change. He simply looked at the tactical display and watched his ships take apart the Accord fleet, piece by piece. The Battle of Sol lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers. Of Dreth's 600 warships, 31 survived and fled into hyperspace, damaged and leaking atmosphere. Dreth himself was found in a sealed compartment, deep inside his flagship, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard, alive and uninjured, because the boarding team had been specifically ordered to take him alive. They brought him to Do-Yun's ship, in restraints. He was tall enough that he had to bend down in the human-sized corridors. He looked at the humans around him with an expression that Nari later described as the face of someone who has just discovered that the animal they were planning to cage has teeth. Do-Hyun did not speak to him. Not yet. There would be time for that later. Instead, Do-Hyun stood at the bridge window and looked out at the wreckage drifting through space. Twisted metal and frozen atmosphere and the faint glow of fires still burning inside sealed compartments. He watched it for a long time. Nari approached him carefully. "Admiral, should I prepare a victory address for the fleet?" "No," Do-Hyun said. "This was their worst fleet. Ceremonial ships and paper soldiers. Their real military is deeper in Accord space, and when they hear what happened here, they will mobilize everything they have." He turned away from the window. "We do not celebrate. We move. Set course for Accord space. All ships." "Sir, the crews need rest. We have wounded." "The crews can rest when the galaxy understands that we are not something to be owned." His voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was flat and certain and absolute. "All ships forward, now." The fleet moved. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had never heard of Earth, and worlds that had lived under their own tier classifications for centuries, the footage of the Battle of Sol leaked through alien networks like water through cracks in a dam. Species that had been silent for generations watched a small, short-lived, supposedly primitive species destroy a conclave fleet in 4 hours. And something in them, something old and buried and almost forgotten, began to stir. The galaxy had never seen anything move like humanity's fleet. In the old wars, fought thousands of years before humans even discovered fire, galactic conflicts moved slowly. Fleets advanced, held territory, built supply lines, negotiated between battles. Wars lasted decades, sometimes centuries. They were slow, careful, political things, more like chess games than fights. Do-Hyun did not play chess. He played like a fire burning through dry grass. Earth's fleet tore through Accord space without stopping, without resting, without pausing to hold a single world they passed. Do-Hyun was not interested in territory. He was not building an empire. He was doing something far simpler and far more frightening. He was making the Accord's ability to wage war disappear. Every military shipyard they found, they destroyed. Every weapons depot, every fuel station, every orbital defense platform, gone. They struck and moved, never staying in one place long enough for the Accord to organize a response. Hana's intelligence network fed them a constant stream of enemy positions, fleet movements, and communication intercepts. The Accord's commanders were always one step behind, always arriving at the site of the last attack to find nothing but wreckage and silence. But Do-hyun added something to each attack that was not military. It was a message. After every battle, every destroyed installation, his fleet broadcast a single data package on every available frequency. The package contained two things. The first was the full, unedited text of the Tier 5 decree, the document that had classified humanity as slaves, printed in the languages of every species that could receive it. The second was footage, security recordings from slave processing centers, internal conclave documents describing the allocation of human populations, audio from meetings where alien bureaucrats discussed which human children should be separated from their parents for labor redistribution. Do-hyun did not add commentary. He did not make speeches. He simply let the truth speak for itself and let the galaxy decide what it meant. Hana's operatives did their part from within. They had spent decades embedding themselves in the communication networks of the Accord, and now they used that access to create chaos. Fleet commands were altered. Supply shipments were redirected to empty coordinates. Defense alerts were delayed by hours, or sometimes simply deleted. The elder species, who had not coordinated a real military response in millennia, found that their systems betrayed them at every turn. They blamed each other. They accused each other of sabotage and treachery. The Conclave, which had held together for 12,000 years through shared power and mutual benefit, began to crack. And then Yuna spoke. She had been quiet since the war began. She had returned to Earth after delivering the decree, and had spent months working in silence, writing and rewriting a single document. Now she stepped in front of a camera in a bare room with no flags, no symbols, no decorations, just her face and a microphone. Her message was not addressed to the Conclave. It was addressed to everyone else. "My name is Yuna," she said. "I was the human diplomatic envoy to the Galactic Accord. 3 months ago, the Overseer Conclave classified my species as slaves. They gave us 90 days to surrender our freedom, our homes, and our children. We did not surrender. We fought. We are still fighting. But I am not speaking to you today about our war. I am speaking to you about yours." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "The tier system did not begin with us. Many of you have lived under it for centuries. Some of you were classified as Tier 3 or Tier 4, species with limited rights, restricted movement, controlled breeding. Some of you were Tier 5 once, before you earned your way up through obedience and service. You know what that system is. You know what it does. You have felt it. Earth is not fighting for dominion. We do not want to rule anyone. We are fighting to burn the system that allows any species to own another. If you want to stand with us, stand. If you want to stay silent, we understand. But the tiers end today." The broadcast reached every corner of the Accord. Within a week, 12 species formally defected from the Conclave and declared support for Earth. Within 2 weeks, 30 more withdrew to neutral positions, refusing to contribute ships or resources to the war effort. The Conclave's coalition, which had seemed unbreakable for 12,000 years, was bleeding members like a wounded animal. The Overseer Conclave panicked. In a closed emergency session, the 4 remaining members of the Conclave made a decision born from desperation. Deep in the vaults of the oldest Conclave homeworlds, there were weapons left over from ancient wars. Weapons so destructive that they had been sealed away and forbidden for millennia. Planet-killing devices designed to end civilizations, not battles. The conclave unsealed them and pointed them at humanity's colony worlds. 2 colonies were hit before Earth could respond. The first was a farming world called New Horizon, home to 4 million people. The weapon turned its atmosphere into fire. The second was a mining colony on a frozen moon, home to 10 million. The weapon shattered the moon itself. 14 million humans died in less than an hour. Jiho was in his cockpit when the news reached the fleet. He was between missions, floating in the cold dark between stars, and the notification appeared on his screen without warning. He read the names of the colonies. He read the numbers. He stared at his screen until the words blurred, and he realized he was crying. He had a cousin on New Horizon, a girl named Soman, who was 9 years old and wanted to be a pilot like him. He pressed his hands against his face and made no sound. Around him, across the fleet, thousands of other men and women did the same thing. The silence that followed was not the focused silence of before. It was heavier. It was darker. It carried something that had not been there at the start of the war. Grief turning into something beyond anger. The galaxy watched. The species who had defected, the species who had gone neutral, the species still loyal to the conclave, all of them waited to see what humanity would do. Many expected collapse. Surely this was too much. Surely now the small, fragile species would break. They did not break. Dohyun received the casualty report in his private quarters. He read it alone. He sat with it for a long time. When he emerged, his face was the same as it had always been. Calm, controlled, unreadable. But something in his eyes had changed. Something had been removed from them. Some last restraint, some final hesitation. He opened a secure channel to Taiwan, still in his facility beneath the frozen earth. Black wave, Dohyun said. One word. There was silence on the other end. Then Taiwan's voice, quiet and careful. Admiral, if we use it, there is no going back. The galaxy as it exists will cease to function. Every species, including us, will be cut off from each other. It could take centuries to rebuild. I know. 14 million people, Admiral. I understand. But Black Wave does not bring them back. It only ensures that everything else ends too. They killed 14 million people to teach us obedience, Dohyun said. I am going to teach them what it costs to try. Another silence, longer this time. Understood, Taiwan said. Black Wave will be ready in 6 hours. On the bridge, Nari heard the order. She closed her eyes. Around her, the bridge crew stood frozen at their stations. No one spoke. No one questioned it. They had all read the same casualty report. They had all lost someone. 6 hours. That was all the galaxy had left. 6 hours before everything changed. Taiwan sat alone in the deepest room of the deepest facility on Earth and looked at the screen in front of him. One button, one command. That was all it would take. He had spent 11 years building this system, testing it, refining it, praying that no one would ever ask him to use it. Now someone had asked, and the prayer had meant nothing. He thought about what Black Wave actually was, because the galaxy deserved to have someone understand it fully before it was unleashed. The Galactic Accord's entire civilization was built on one thing, the hyperspace relay network. Thousands of relays scattered across the galaxy, each one a gateway that allowed ships to travel between stars in days instead of centuries, allowed communications to cross the void in seconds instead of millennia. Without the relays, every species was an island. With them, they were a civilization. The relays were the veins of the galaxy, and everything, trade, travel, communication, military coordination, governance, flowed through them. Black Wave was a signal, a precisely engineered energy pulse designed to travel through the relay network itself, using the relays as both pathway and amplifier. It carried 2 payloads. The first payload was information, Hana's intelligence network had not only mapped military positions and fleet movements. Over 20 years, her operatives had copied the most classified archives of the Overseer Conclave, records that the Conclave believed were stored on systems no outsider could access. They were wrong. Hana's people had accessed them, copied them, and transmitted them to Earth, in fragments so small that no security system ever detected the theft. Those archives contained everything. 12,000 years of secrets. Records of species that had been quietly exterminated when they became politically inconvenient. Documents describing the sterilization of entire worlds to suppress uprisings. Genetic modification programs designed to make Tier 3 and Tier 4 species more obedient over generations. Subtle changes to brain chemistry that made populations calmer, less aggressive, more willing to follow orders. Meeting transcripts where Conclave members discussed the tier system not as a classification of natural ability, but as a tool of control. They had always known. The tiers were never about biology. They were about power. They were about making sure that the oldest species stayed on top and everyone else stayed beneath them. Blackwave would send all of it to every device in the galaxy simultaneously. Every species would see what the Conclave had done. Not rumors, not accusations, proof. After the data was delivered, Blackwave would overload the relay network's core frequency, creating a cascading failure that would shut down every relay in the galaxy permanently. The relays would not explode. They would simply stop working. Their internal systems burned out beyond repair by the same signal that carried the truth through them. Taewon pressed the button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then his screens lit up with cascading confirmation signals as the pulse entered the nearest relay and began to spread. It moved at the speed of the relay network itself, effectively instantaneous across galactic distances. Within 60 seconds, it had reached every relay in the galaxy. Within 90 seconds, every device capable of receiving a transmission was downloading the Conclave's archives. On 100,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size and biology stopped what they were doing and looked at their screens. They saw documents they had never been meant to see. They read about species they had never known existed, species that had been erased from history because they had resisted the Conclave. They saw the genetic reports. They saw the sterilization orders. They saw the meeting transcripts where their own worlds, their own people, were discussed as inventory to be managed. Speaker Varel, the amphibian official who had read the Tier 5 decree against humanity, was in his private chamber when the data arrived. He read the first document, and his skin went pale. He read the second, and his hands began to shake. By the 10th document, he was frantically trying to contact the other members of the Conclave, but his communications were already failing. The relays were dying. One by one, across the galaxy, the relays went dark. The lights on their surfaces flickered and faded. The hum of their engines went silent. The hyperspace routes they had maintained for 12,000 years collapsed. Ships in transit were thrown back into normal space, stranded wherever they happened to be. Communication networks fragmented and fell apart. Trade routes ceased to exist. The military coordination that held the Conclave's remaining forces together vanished in an instant. The galaxy was disconnected. Every species was alone. Taewon watched the last confirmation signal appear on his screen. Every relay in the network, all 8,712 of them, was offline, permanently. He sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the dark screen. "It is done," he said to no one. "The galaxy as it was, is over." Aboard Do-Yoon's flagship, the bridge crew watched the same data scroll across their own screens. Nari had tears on her face, not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming scale of what the archives contained. 12,000 years of cruelty, meticulously documented by the very beings who committed it. She would spend the rest of her life studying those records and never reach the bottom of them. Dohan stood at his window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, the Conclave's remaining fleet was scattering, unable to communicate, unable to coordinate, unable to do anything but drift. Varel's final transmission, a desperate plea for negotiation, had gone into the void and would never be answered. Not because anyone refused, but because there was no longer any way to answer. His voice was gone. His power was gone. His civilization, the structure that had given him authority over billions of lives for millennia, was gone. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to understand what had happened. Species turned inward. Governments restructured. The old tier classifications, exposed as tools of oppression rather than measures of worth, were abandoned on world after world. Some species raged. Some grieved. Some celebrated. Most simply sat with the truth and tried to decide what to do with it. Nari calculated that it would take centuries for any species to develop independent hyperspace travel. The relay network had been a shortcut, and now the shortcut was gone. The galaxy would have to grow up the hard way, each species finding its own path between the stars at its own pace, on its own terms. Yuna began writing. She called it the Open Charter, a framework for a new galactic community, built not on tiers or classifications, but on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. She knew it would take generations to implement. She wrote it anyway. Some things are not built for the people who start them. They are built for the people who come after. Jiho flew home. His ship descended through the atmosphere and landed at the old military base outside Busan on a rainy afternoon. He walked through the streets of his childhood in the rain, past the docks where his mother worked, past the school where he had once been a boy who had never seen a starship. He carried the letter he had written months ago, the one he had never sent, the one that said he was fine and not to worry, and that he loved her. He found his mother at home. She opened the door and looked at him for a long time. He held out the letter. She did not take it. She did not read it. She just pulled him inside and held him, and the rain fell on the empty doorstep behind them. Hana dismantled her intelligence network. She did it herself, personally, deleting files and burning encryption keys and sending final messages to operatives across the galaxy, telling them they were free of their service. Her deputy asked her why. She said, "We built this network for a war. The war is over. If we keep it, if we hold on to this power, we become exactly what we fought against. I will not let that happen." Do-hyun stood before the United Earth Council one final time. The room was full. Every leader, every general, every diplomat who had survived the war was there. They offered him any title he wanted: Supreme Commander, Chancellor, Protector of Earth, whatever he desired. He looked at them and shook his head. "We were not fighting to rule," he said. "We were fighting to make a point." He paused. The room was silent. "The point has been made." He walked out. He went home to Incheon. He found his garden overgrown and his tomatoes dead, and his house exactly as he had left it, door still unlocked, dishes still in the sink. He stood in his kitchen and breathed the quiet air, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He was not sure what to call it. It might have been peace. Not this time. And far away, on a small blue world, orbiting a dim red star, a species that had lived under Tier 3 classification for 4,000 years, gathered in their central hall. They had read the Conclave's archives. They had watched the relays go dark. They had spent days in silence, trying to understand what it all meant. Now their leaders sat together and asked the only question that mattered. What do we do now? An elder among them, old and slow and tired from a lifetime of living under rules written by others, looked up at the sky, where the relay signals used to blink, and saw only stars. "Whatever we choose," the elder said. And for the first time in 4,000 years, that was true.